Brentor Commons Association would like to invite you to visit the two areas of common land which we own and manage near to the village of Brentor. In the far distance you can see the Brentor itself, with the church of St Michael de la Roupe sitting on the top of this ancient volcanic plug. Scanning around to the south, it opens out onto the wide expanse of Bowden Down, which is our largest piece of land. It originally was lowland heath, but degraded over many years to the point where it has become unmanageable and overgrown with bracken, gorse, etc. A piece of quite poor land, grazed in the past by commoners who still have commoners' rights. The two downs, Bowden and Lidderton, lie between Brentor and Chillerton and are easily accessed by foot, bicycle, horse and car. Bowden Down in particular is popular with walkers and horse riders, as it is relatively flat and has clearly defined walking paths which crisscross the whole area. Both downs are managed primarily for their flora and fauna wildlife, which is wide and diversified. Both downs have a very high biodiversity value, with rare and endangered species, for example dormice, 11 species of bats, and very rare mud snails in the pond on Lidderton Down. We also have small pill-bordered fritillary butterflies, a wide range of birds. 69 varieties of species of birds have been identified on the commons over the years. 150 species of moths last year when we did a moth survey. We have in the pond we have diving beetles, newts, frogs, and a fantastic range of flowers, particularly in the May time when both commons are covered with bluebells, which are quite stunning, particularly on the northeast quadrant of Lidderton Down, which we'll be visiting later on. Just scanning around here, you can see the type of land that it is now. We're now in the very end of July and the bracken is at its peak. We roll the bracken usually at the beginning of August to knock it back and reduce its vigour. We've been doing this since 2005 using a bracken roller which we got from a grant from the Open Spaces Society. In the early days we used to pull it behind a quad bike, but that was quite hard work and was wearing the quad out. So in recent years we've been using a local farmer from Chillerton to do the towing it behind his tractor, which is a lot more efficient, a lot faster. And he can get round in it in an hour or so, where it would have taken us a couple of days. We're now looking over to the west, where the large pile of trees are, expansive trees are. That's where there was the original mine. There was mining on Bowden Down in the 19th century, mainly manganese and some ochre, which is a byproduct. There was a mine over to the west there, and it was called Bowden Hill Mine or Bowden Down Mine or East Chillerton Mine, depending on which records you look at. It was manganese. It wasn't very productive. It arose on the back of the manganese boom, which was actually growing due to the growing steel and industry business in this country. Manganese mainly went to South Wales via Tavistock and down the Tamar. The mines opened 2 or 3 times over the years, but weren't particularly good, and stopped in the 1880s, 1890s. There were attempts to reopen them, but the only thing that came out of it in the future was actually ochre, which was used in the First World War for making paint, and a lot of the paint actually was used on British battleships. We are now facing east, so we're looking over to the eastern edges of Dartmoor, and in winter time, when the trees are down and don't have leaf, we have a fantastic view from the very top of Dartmoor right over down towards the south area of Dartmoor. But you still can get these good views if you walk down the Holloway, which is our old drover's route, which we'll visit later on. But it is a spectacular view, great walking, and it just gives you a complete 360-degree view. To the north, past behind this copse here, which has been gradually growing up over the last 30 years, it's mainly oak, hawthorn, blackthorn, rowan and birch. The land slopes away down into the Lydd Valley. The Lydd Valley is part of the Tamar Valley area of outstanding natural beauty. The land here is poor, but as you get off the commons, it becomes quite productive land, mainly livestock. There's a few people growing crops, farmers growing corn and winter wheat, barley down in the valley, but by and large around here it's all cattle and sheep. This area we're now looking at, the main area of Bowden Down, was about 6 foot deep in bracken when we first bought the commons back in 2004. And as you can see, the actual bracken has gradually reduced and the grasses are now coming through. And we now have some wild moor grass here establishing itself. We also have small patches of heather which are indicators of that this was once lowland heath. And when we were doing our initial surveys, we found 5 or 6 patches isolated around the place. But looking over towards where the Tor is, in the land just this side of the Torp, that would have been covered in bracken, would have been covered in heather, gorse, but of course it's been farmed and this has all been removed and just trampled out by the cattle over many, many hundreds of years. But we have replanted, tried to re-establish the heather, the common heather, and a couple of years ago we planted 300 heather plugs just about 100 meters from here in an area where we had found some existing heather, and they are thriving. So we hope to extend that area and supplement it in the coming years. The gorse is very important. It produces a huge amount of food for early insect life when it's in flower. It also protects trees which grow here. So in the past, when there was cattle and sheep on the commons, they would have trampled out and grazed off the small trees as they came up, so they didn't really stand a chance. But the gorse and hawthorn and blackthorn protects the smaller trees to the point where they get big enough to survive anything that might be thrown at them by livestock. I mean, at the moment, the only livestock we have on the commons is the occasional movement of sheep and cattle by local farmers who use it as a cut across. And of course we do have red deer and roe deer. The red deer don't really exist on the commons. They live down the Lydd Valley and over in the woods, and they'll make their way up here from time to time. The roe deer are here all of the time. They are omnipresent throughout the year, and they have young up here on both Bowden and on Lytterton Down. Some of the works that we've had to do over the years since we bought the commons is to fence the 7 or 8 mine shafts that exist on the common. This is either a mine shaft or a walk-in adit, which went into the mine levels, which are about 20 or 30 meters below us here, maybe deeper. We do have quite an extensive plan of the underground workings done by the Plymouth Caving and Mining Group about 15 years ago, and we think this is about as far as they came underground. So, but we think it continues over, as there are other mine shafts further over to the northeast on the commons, but we've yet to find those ones. But they do show on the actual 1898 and 1887 OS maps, so they are there and exist, but we've never actually come across them. Commons, as it says in its name, is common land. So the Brentor Commons Association owns and manages the land. There are commoners, who are mainly farmers, who live around and farm around both downs, who have commoners' rights, mainly to graze sheep, cattle, pigs, remove wood, timber, gorse, turfs, stone. But the commoners ceased doing this as a place to graze back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And since then, due to the lack of stock being on the commons, the land degraded, became very overgrown, and began to revert, or rewild as they call it these days, to what it would have been like before the area was grazed heavily. All of the land to the south of here, towards Tavistock, would have been heathland, and about 2 miles away down on the corner there's a junction, it's called Heathfield, and there are pockets of heath there which you can just see. There's a large barn in the distance there, and behind that you can see trees, and that's Heathfield, and there will be probably heather down there, but that is part one of the existing bits, but that is not common land. This is the only common land that is here apart from Dartmoor itself. There are two roads on Lytterton Down. This is the looking south towards Brentor itself, which is this little road which turns off the main road between Brentor and Chillerton, and this road heads down south into the Lyd Valley. A rather spectacular spot if you ever go down there. It's actually beautiful, very unspoilt. It's farmed, but there are areas which have been untouched at the far eastern end, where it drifts off into Lidford Woods. Of course, you get fantastic views of the Tor from here, as you do from most of this common, and you also get fantastic views from Lytterton if you know where to go. There are smaller patches of betony on the common. It's a beautiful purpley blue flower. It has medicinal uses. So this is gradually spreading amongst the bracken, and we're very pleased about this. It's taken a few years, but it's now on about 5 or 6 places on Bowden Down. We're now looking along the path which runs parallel to the Brentor to Chillerton Road. We're looking virtually due west at the moment. So we're about 20 metres off the road. This long path we maintain, we keep it clear as best we can. We cut it usually a couple of times a year, and it's very popular with riders who like to have a gallop along here. It's pretty level. It's just slightly rising towards to the west, and when you spin round, you see a small copse of birch trees. These are some of the trees that we planted back in 2006, 2007, and they're now some of them 30 feet high. Birch in particular will colonize very, very quickly. They call it a pioneer tree, so it's one of the first ones to appear. Its seed is usually held in the ground for many, many years, and it's easily spread. So we're pleased that this is it's been successful, this area. This is the beginning of that path, just about 10 metres short of the junction between the Lytterton turn-off and the road over to Chillerton. As you can see, there's a lot of purpley, tall, spiky flowers. This is known as willow herb, sweet bay willow herb. The larvae of the elephant hawk moth, which is one of our most spectacular moths, which lives up here in the commons, actually feeds on this plant, and so we're keen to encourage it. It is gradually spreading across both downs. Obviously you can get smaller versions of willow herb, but this is bay willow herb. You also see gorse, late flowering gorse, and the size of some of our trees now, which are doing very well. This is the junction I mentioned earlier. So this is the road which goes across down to Lytterton, round to Corriton, down into the Lyd Valley, and the road goes round, it goes straight on here over to Chillerton, It leaves the down in about a quarter of a mile, and then it's about another quarter of a mile, and it comes onto Lytterton Down. There's parking on the side of the road here, just straight ahead near the sign where it says restricted byway. That's one of the paths which runs across. It was one of the original paths, but we rediscovered the original Holloway Drovers route a couple of years ago. We knew it was there, but we rediscovered it and had it opened up, which is spectacular. So there's a bit of parking. In the summertime you can park on the side of the down where it's safe to do so, where it's dry. In the winter it can be a bit muddy, as some of the tractors do come off to turn into the field, so where you could park now in July you might struggle in January, February, March, April, or during a wet period. But there are little places like this where you can park up just off the road. It's a quiet road, so don't expect to see a lot of traffic along here. Looking virtually due east again, this is the road which runs off the down going towards Brentor. In about a mile away it's a T-junction where it joins the main Tavistock to Lidford road. So you turn down here not long after you've passed the turning for Brentor village. This is the restricted byway, which means traffic is not allowed to go along here. Horse riders use it, walkers use it, dog walkers use it, runners use it. It's fairly level. There are some wet muddy patches in the winter which we've been gradually filling in with some stone, and we hope to do more of that later in the year because some places become difficult. However, you can cut in along the Holloway which runs directly parallel to it. There are a couple of places where you can cut in just by the restricted byway sign, and just a little bit further along the actual byway on the right hand side there's a little cut in which we made, and you can come in through here and then you head round past the pile of brash, and there is the beginning of the old route. This was completely overgrown until 2 years ago and it was impassable. But we had a fantastic day's work from the Tavistock Task Force who cleared the way through and opened up places people who, like myself, who've lived here for many years had never been into. It is quite spectacular, particularly in spring when the bluebells are out. But it is actually a beautiful route, and it has been recorded on maps back in the 1760s and probably earlier. So it predates the roads. This path here was part of the Drovers route which came down from Oakhampton down to Lidford. And of course they couldn't go across the gorge or the river, so they came down the Lyd Valley on the other side, on the north side, till they got to a ford down at Longham, which is down on the way to Corriton, and they crossed there. Then they came up through the woods and along this side here, and then they continued their journey. And if they had cattle or sheep, often they would rest their cattle and sheep on the commons. So they had grass, and there's water here as well. There's a few places where water would gather. We also have some fantastic areas of fern along here, and in the wet periods, which happens quite often around here, it's almost like being in a tropical rainforest. But on the other side of this bank here, the other side of the Holloway, is the actual fields which are managed. You're now entering the Holloway. You can see why it's called the Holloway, because over the years it's been hollowed out by pack horses, cattle, sheep, people just walking. This Holloway runs down off Bowden Down into the Lyd Valley, crosses over at Longham Ford and carries on up the other side, where it's exactly the same. It's a hollowed out track, hollowed out by many hundreds of feet over the years. So it is an ancient route, and Holloways are very important. They're quite extensive in the south of England. There's quite a few in Devon. Quite a few in Dorset and Hampshire and Somerset, but this is our own little one here, and we do have an example of one also on Lytterton Down, which wasn't as heavily used, but this was a very busy route at some point in its history. This is a hole, as you can see, quite obvious. It goes down very steeply. We're not sure what it is. We don't think it was anything to do with badgers. There's no badger activity on the commons at the moment. There's occasional one pass through, but there's no badger sets that we're aware of. And some of us think that this may have been an old mining adit, because there was a lot of other mining going on here, and this could be remainders of an adit. This side of the commons was also mined for ochre, but this looks more like an adit, because some of us actually have been down similar things like this in the Birkham Valley. But we're not going to attempt this unless we send a camera down to see exactly what is down there. It's a bit scary, really. So you can see how the land does drop away. It is quite a hollow at this point on the trail. This is a bench about halfway along the trail we put up back in the earlier this year, and using a bit of oak for uprights from some trees which have been trimmed in Christchurch's graveyard in Brentor, and a bit of timber that I had lying around the place. We chose this as it's on a bit of a bank, and of course you get fantastic views on the other side. It's very popular here. It's a great place to sit and rest, and of course in the springtime, in May time, you're just surrounded by a mass of bluebells. It's a very popular place to sit. This is the view from the bench. It's beautiful, so you get a fantastic panoramic vista of the western slopes of Dartmoor. And the leaves are off the tree. It is absolutely beautiful. It's also very cold because it does catch the weather here. You're looking down across fields now, and where it dips down, this is the Birkham Valley, which is a small valley which runs down into the Lydd Valley, and there's a beautiful stream that runs down to it and comes out just down by Longham Ford, which is where the old drovers used to cross the river. The track that crosses the down as well, running parallel to the old drovers route. It's the restricted byway. Again, it's popular. It's probably a bit easier to walk because there's a few little stumps and falling over places on the old drovers route. But this is a nice place. We often find riders down here. It's very popular. We will be cutting this. We usually cut it twice a year just to keep the vegetation back. But it is a lovely little walk as well. Our little tracks which crisscross the down. This one is just past a quite large birch copse along the byway. If you go off to your left here, that's if you're coming from the Brentor end of the world, you'll end up back on the road which crosses over. It's a nice little walk. Last year we rolled and cut this area to the right. You wouldn't believe it now, due to the depth and the height of the bracken, but we had the most spectacular showing of bluebells, which have been buried for years under the bracken and the brash. So we'll manage this more extensively next year. But we don't want to remove all the bracken because it does support a wide range of invertebrates. English nature say it's something in the region of 48 invertebrates depend upon bracken for their food and shelter. So it'd be wrong to start removing. Also the birds love it in there because they just nest like crazy. Hence why we don't roll it until we're pretty certain that most of the nesting birds have gone. You're now on the road between Brentor and Chillerton. You're looking virtually due east towards Brentor. As we pan around, see how the road leaves the commons here. So it's about a quarter of a mile across to Lytterton. In here, in this dense undergrowth, are the remains of the Bowden Hill or East Chillerton mine, which was the manganese mine which I mentioned earlier. Here in these woods we have the remains, which are fenced off of course now, of the old mine shafts, walking adits, areas where there were workshops, pumping rooms, areas where they stored the ore. This is also the area where we have dormice nesting, and so we keep it fairly wild in here. The dormice don't like our presence. We have various nesting boxes up, and we have engaged with the Devon Mammal Society to help us identify where they are. We know they're here. We've discovered the chewed hazelnuts, which are very, very distinctive how they chew them. And hopefully at some point we will actually get to see the critters. But they are nocturnal. They live up and high in the trees or in the undergrowth, so you have to be very, very lucky to find them. But hopefully this year, with our new nesting boxes that we put up, we might find some. We're now on Lidderton Down, and this is the Lidderton Pond, which was originally a quarry, and it fills up. It's called an ephemeral pond, which means it's not fed by stream or spring. It just fills up over the winter months by rainwater, and by this time in July, August, it is virtually dry. When it's at its deepest, which is on the side next to the road, it's about 8 to 9 foot deep with an awful lot of rubbish underneath it. Sadly, that was one of the problems with it. For many years it became a rubbish tip, and after we bought the commons we had to spend money, which we got via a grant, to clear out much of the rubbish, which a lot was old car oil filters and things from the motor trade. We took out 15 steel barrel loads of rubbish from here, including tyres and glass and bottles, and you can still see pieces there which come up from time to time as it gets lower and lower, which we gradually remove. The pond is also home to our rare mud snail. It's a red book 2, which means it's rare and endangered, but it does like this kind of conditions, and it will live in the wet mud quite happily all year round. It never totally dries up. We've had work done here in the last couple of years. We've had some of the willow coppiced, so this was cut right back and is growing back. This has let more light into the whole quarry area, and this is why we've got this fantastic stand of foxgloves, which no doubt will grow. It's a great place. You often find deer in here, even ducks now. Locals refer to it as the duck pond because over the years the willow has taken over. It is an invasive species, and even one of our locals remembers it so frozen and level that he skated on it. It is a very special place. It is one of 3 quarries on Lidderton Down. There's a much larger quarry to the south, and there's a path which runs down the eastern edge of the quarry, which we opened up earlier this year, and you come down to quite a large quarry. There's a bit of a drop going into it, so you have to be careful. We were going to fence it off, but all the problems with COVID meant that we couldn't do it, but we will be doing it as and when we can. Lidderton Down is the smallest. It's probably the most diverse in terms of its biodiversity. It has a large colony of small-pill bordered fritillaries, which is again one of our endangered butterfly species. It also has a colony of dormice. Deer regularly have their young up here. There'll be deer up here with their young at the moment. It also has the most fantastic bluebell stand on the northeast quadrant. Lidderton Down is cut by 2 roads. The road which goes between Brentor and Chillerton, and then there's a road another road down to Lidderton and back over towards Westcott, which is a small community up near the Tor. We do little to this commons. We roll the bracken in August on 2 areas, and that's gradually reducing. We have been reducing the willow in the pond. We've opened up the old track down Stowford Hill, which there's a property down there which used to be the poorhouse of the parish. I just noted that you can't get any further away from the centre of the parish. You cross the little stream down there at the bottom and it becomes Lamerton and Milton Abbot parish. So this is a pretty overgrown place. The water level is where you see it now. So in March the water was right up to where the brown ends and the foxgloves begin. So it does fill up quite considerably. A couple of benches put here, the lovely oak benches with again more oak supports from the Christchurch graveyard in Brentor. It's lovely here just to sit and you look down onto the pond here, and there's a wide range of birds here: dippers, warblers, blackcaps. I've been down here at 4 o'clock in the morning setting up opening up moth traps, and the cacophony of bird sound is absolutely amazing. We're gradually clearing areas back here to make it more accessible, but we want to keep it as wild as possible because we don't really want to damage the wildlife that is here. We have to reduce the willow carefully, so you do it over a 3-year cycle. So this lot was cut about 2 years ago, so in another year we will reduce some of the other willow. You don't want to take too much of the shade from the pond in one go, otherwise it'll just get over algaed. So you do it just gently, you let the willow coppers back up. As you can see, that growth there, you can see the new growth is 2 years old, so it belts away. Here's another little bench that we put at the side of the pond. So you have 2 benches if you come up here and sit. It's a lovely, peaceful, tranquil place. It's just off on the left-hand side of the road as you come onto Lidderton Down, coming from the Brentor end of the world. There's a little cut which is quite overgrown at the moment, but we do open it to keep it access for all. There are various tracks which run across Lidderton, but they're not as heavily used. It's a little known piece of land, and we probably intend to keep it that way, really. So this is the way into the pond, a little cut in there, and you can see the road. This is the road heading back towards Brentor. You spin round, you can see that the road heads off down towards Chillerton. We also have a fantastic stand of rosebay willow herb here as well. This is generally spreading across both downs now. North across the Lid Valley. So the road is about 100 metres from here where it crosses, dropping down to the Lid Valley. So you're looking across now to Corriton, Lee Woods and beyond. You're looking right up towards Bracknell Valley, and in the far distance you'd be going over towards Roadford Lake. You're looking back over this way towards Lidford Woods. This down is absolutely beautiful in the spring again. It's completely covered in bluebells. This is the crossroads for Lidderton, Chillerton and Brentor. This is Lidderton Down crossroads, so if you head due north you're dropping down to Lidderton and around to Corriton. You're going back across towards Brentor. You're dropping down here, which is Stowford Hill, which goes down to the little stream at the bottom, and then up and over to Westcott, and ultimately comes up by the Tor. And this is where the road drops down to Chillerton. There's a long drive down. There's spectacular views from this road all the way along. Of course you get the usual views of Brentor and its church from here. And here we have some lovely views across to the Lid Valley. I don't know whether the microphone will pick it up, but there's a yellow hammer, which is one of our lovely species on the commons. If you find it hearing away singing there, doing a little bit of bread and cheese please, that's quite common. We have stone chats, there are barn owls in the evening, lots of tawnies, buzzards of course, and this year we've had quite a few red kite around, which is great. We've also had grasshopper warblers on both downs this year. You never see them, you just hear them. It sounds like a metallic whir. It's very odd. It's a very small, indistinguishable little bird which you don't often see, but it was here this year.